You work hard, you save diligently, you pay your taxes, follow the rules, do everything society told you would lead to a good life. But somehow, your bank account doesn't move. Meanwhile, the rich, they get richer effortlessly. Even in times of crisis, when jobs vanish and prices soar, their wealth multiplies. It's not just frustrating, it feels like the rules are rigged, and maybe, just maybe, they are. This isn't some random glitch in the system, it is the system. One that was carefully crafted not by accident but by design. Just as Machiavelli warned us over 500 years ago, he didn't sugarcoat the world. He didn't preach fairness or moral ideals. Instead, he exposed something darker, something most of us were never taught to see. Power has its own logic, and in the game of power, morality isn't rewarded, understanding the game is. You were raised to believe that good behavior leads to good outcomes, that if you work hard and play fair, success will eventually find you. But look around. The wealthiest people aren't always the hardest working. The most powerful aren't always the most ethical. In fact, quite the opposite. The more you believe in a just world, the more you become a pawn in someone else's strategy. This truth is bitter, but it's also liberating because once you see it, you can stop blaming yourself. You can stop wondering what you did wrong. You didn't fail the system. The system was never built for you to win. It was built to reward those who learn how it really works. Those who understand perception, manipulation, and the quiet mechanisms of influence, not just effort or virtue. Machiavelli's message wasn't to become cruel. It was to become aware. He didn't glorify the ruthless. He simply exposed how they win so that you wouldn't walk blind into a game you never agreed to play. And once you see that the game exists, once you realize it rewards strategy over sincerity, you can finally stop waiting for fairness and start thinking like a strategist. Not to dominate, but to protect yourself. Not to manipulate, but to stop being manipulated. This isn't about envy, it's about clarity. Because the world isn't broken, it's working exactly as it was designed to. The question is, are you finally ready to stop playing by rules that were never written for you? Machiavelli never claimed that power belonged to the just. He simply told the truth that in politics and in life, being good is optional. Looking good, however, that's essential. In The Prince, he wrote that a ruler doesn't need to actually be virtuous. He only needs to appear that way, and in today's world, the same logic applies. The people who rise to the top often aren't the ones who work the hardest. They're the ones who master perception, influence, optics. They understand something most of us were never taught. Success in a system built on power isn't about playing fair, it's about playing smart. It's about knowing the rules beneath the rules. Think of it this way. You were taught to value effort. They were taught to value leverage. You pay your taxes and feel proud of your contribution. Meanwhile, billionaires hire teams of lawyers to bend legislation in their favor and call it strategy. Jeff Bezos, for example, lobbied for corporate tax breaks, while Amazon generated tens of billions in revenue. Not illegal, just strategic. Warren Buffett once openly admitted he pays a lower tax rate than his secretary. Why? Because his income is classified as capital gains, not earned income. It's not about working more, it's about knowing how wealth works. This isn't a conspiracy theory, it's public record. But because these tactics are wrapped in the language of innovation and economic growth, they're rarely questioned. Power, as Machiavelli knew, thrives in disguise. These people aren't smarter than you, they're not inherently better. But they've mastered the art of appearing respectable while building systems that quietly reinforce their dominance. They don't need to break the rules, they influence the rules, while you were taught to obey them. Now, let's be clear, we're not glorifying this behavior. In fact, on this channel, we often challenge the morality behind it. We expose it not to celebrate the game, but to make sure you're not the one being played. Because if you don't understand how this world actually operates, you're left confused, exhausted, and blaming yourself for outcomes that were never in your control. Machiavelli's message was never be like them. It was don't be naive. He didn't write The Prince to tell you to abandon your ethics. He wrote it so that people like you wouldn't be crushed by those who already have. So the lesson here isn't to become ruthless. It's to become aware. Because when you start to see the strategies behind the power, you gain something far more important than wealth. You gain clarity. And in a world built on illusion, clarity is power. You've been told that if you just work hard enough, everything will eventually pay off. Go to school, get the degree, stay disciplined, live modestly, follow the rules. But here's what no one told you. You're in a game where the people winning aren't playing by those rules. In fact, they were taught an entirely different set. While you're trading your time for wages, the wealthy are buying access, influence, and information. They aren't clocking in longer hours. They're meeting with lobbyists. They're hiring legal teams and cultivating networks that make the rules bend in their favor. They don't hustle harder. They structure smarter. You were taught that fairness matters, that integrity gets rewarded. But what if the system isn't designed to reward integrity at all? What if it's designed to absorb your effort while protecting those who already understand how to bend it? In 2021, 55 major corporations in the United States, including global giants like Nike, FedEx, and Salesforce, paid $0 in federal income tax. Not because they broke the law, but because they knew exactly how to work it. They took advantage of deductions, credits, loopholes, tools that aren't illegal, just inaccessible to most people. Meanwhile, workers earning far less paid a portion of every paycheck without question. This isn't about who's smarter or more deserving. It's about who's been given access to a different kind of education, one hidden beneath the surface. While the majority were taught to obey and endure, a select few were taught how to manipulate the invisible mechanics behind the scenes. Where you were taught the value of sacrifice, they were taught the power of positioning, and that changes everything. And this is why it feels like the harder you work, the further behind you fall. Because effort without strategy becomes a treadmill, constant motion, no progress, just exhaustion masked as ambition. You're not failing because you're lazy or unworthy. You're stuck because you were never handed the playbook others received quietly. You were encouraged to play the noble game, while others were building the casino around you, collecting the winnings regardless of your outcome. This isn't an accident, it's a filter, a system that quietly separates those who can decode it from those who can't. The elite don't need to be better than you. They just need you to keep believing that the rules apply equally to everyone. But the moment you stop expecting the system to reward you for being good and instead start learning how it functions, the dynamic shifts. Awareness is the first step, because once you see the structure for what it really is, you stop blaming yourself. And you start thinking like someone who knows how to move through it, not by becoming like them, but by finally refusing to be used by them. Machiavelli understood something most people still struggle to accept. In a world full of predators, being too honest can be a liability. He wrote, "A man who wishes to make a profession of goodness in everything must necessarily come to grief among so many who are not good." In other words, if you try to live purely by virtue while others are playing a different game entirely, you will lose. Not because you weren't good enough, but because you were playing by rules no one else was following. This is one of the hardest truths to swallow. Many of us were raised to believe that virtue is always rewarded, that if you sacrifice, obey, and stay disciplined, success will eventually come. But that belief didn't originate from nature. It was designed, taught, repeated, by institutions that benefit when people follow orders without asking why. The elite have always understood the power of moral narratives. They promote a culture of humility and hard work among the masses, while quietly bending the rules for themselves. They preach about fairness and honesty, but behind closed doors, they act with a cold and calculated logic. It's not hypocrisy, it's strategy. And the result? Millions of good, hard-working people walk through life expecting to be rewarded for playing fair, while those in power operate by a different playbook. The system teaches you that obedience is noble, that suffering is redemptive, that patience will be paid back. But who does that story actually serve? The truth is, moral programming works best on those at the bottom. It keeps them cooperative, predictable, contained, and most of all, compliant. And while you live by discipline and loyalty, others use that very discipline against you to keep you in place, to keep you working, to keep you believing. None of this means morality is useless, but Machiavelli forces us to ask, what kind of morality? One that empowers you, or one that sedates you? If your sense of goodness leaves you vulnerable to exploitation, is it really goodness or is it control? The danger isn't in being ethical. The danger is in assuming everyone else is. That's what gets honest people crushed, because they don't see the game being played. They project their integrity onto a world that doesn't return it. And in doing so, they mistake danger for decency and wolves for allies. To survive, more than that, to thrive, you need more than good intentions. You need clarity, you need awareness, you need to see the leash before it tightens. You need to recognize when morality is being used as a leash. Because if you keep trusting a system that rewards manipulation while punishing sincerity, your decency won't save you, it will bury you. If you've ever felt like you were doing everything right but still falling behind, it's not because you lack discipline or intelligence. It's because you were trained for a role you never chose. From the classroom to the office, most people are groomed, not to lead, but to comply, not to think strategically, but to follow instructions. The system doesn't fail you, it filters you, quietly, efficiently, and by design. The structure is intentional. You're taught how to memorize, obey, and perform. You're rewarded for being punctual, polite, and quiet. These are not leadership traits. They're worker traits. You're trained to become a high-functioning part of someone else's machine, not your own. While you're learning to clock in on time, the children of the elite are learning how to manage people like you, literally. At private institutions like Phillips Exeter or Andover, schools that have produced presidents, CEOs, senators, they're not learning how to submit resumes. They're learning how to give orders, manage influence, and move capital. Leadership, negotiation, ownership, these are part of the curriculum. Not because the students are special, but because their families understand the rules of the real game. You were taught to work hard. They were taught to make hard work unnecessary. This isn't just about education. It's about conditioning, mental programming, reinforced over years, often without you even noticing. You were programmed to internalize the belief that labor equals value, that putting in more hours would earn you more respect, more success. But if that were true, wouldn't the hardest working people be the wealthiest? Wouldn't your parents, your neighbors, the people who grind day in and day out, be running the system instead of holding it up? The reality is brutal but simple. The system wasn't built to reward labor. It was built to extract it, to maximize it. And to do that efficiently, it needed a way to separate those who ask questions from those who obey without hesitation. So it taught one class how to follow and another how to lead. One how to serve and another how to shape the rules. This divide isn't about merit, it's about design, a blueprint that rewards conformity below and complexity above. And the more faithfully you accept your role without questioning its limits, the more invisible that design becomes. You were told that success would come if you just kept your head down. But the people at the top? They were taught how to look up. So if you feel like the game was never explained to you, it's because it wasn't supposed to be. The less you know, the smoother the machine runs. The fewer questions you ask, the longer you stay in place. But once you see the machine for what it is, you're no longer just another gear. You become something far more dangerous. Aware. Power today doesn't look like it used to. There are no castles, no crowns, no public declarations of conquest. Instead, power has gone underground, moving silently through boardrooms, digital platforms, and financial systems. Machiavelli's world of open political struggle has evolved into a maze of quiet control, where influence isn't declared, it's embedded. The true rulers of this age aren't presidents or prime ministers. They're asset managers, media owners, data brokers. They don't need to win elections. They just need to control three things: the flow of money, the flow of information, and the flow of belief. Control the money, and you dictate which businesses survive, which innovations get funded, and which voices get a platform. Control information, and you frame what counts as truth, what gets ignored, and what gets labeled a threat. But control belief. That's the deepest form of power, because once people adopt the system as their own, they stop questioning it entirely. This is not a theory. It's how the modern world operates. Take BlackRock, the largest investment firm in existence. They hold major stakes in hundreds of global corporations, from tech to energy to healthcare. They don't need to produce anything themselves. They steer what gets produced through capital allocation. Their name rarely appears in headlines, yet their influence reaches into your bank account, your news feed, your rent, your job security. Quiet power is still power. And it's often more effective because it doesn't provoke resistance. You can't fight what you can't see. That's how the system protects itself. By keeping the real centers of control invisible, it directs your frustration elsewhere, toward politics, toward other workers, even toward yourself, all while the ones shaping the environment remain untouchable. And again, this isn't about envy, it's about awareness. If you've ever wondered why your effort never seems to match your outcome, this is why. You're not behind because you lack intelligence or work ethic. You're behind because there's a whole infrastructure of influence you were never invited to understand. So, no, we don't romanticize the people who built this structure. But we also won't pretend it doesn't exist, because the more clearly you see how it works, the less shame you carry. This clarity doesn't make the game fairer, but it gives you a real starting point. Not to play their game better, but to stop being played by it. You were never asked if you wanted to play this game, but you were given a role in it, quietly, from the moment you entered a classroom, followed instructions, raised your hand, and waited to be called on. The system didn't demand your permission, it simply trained your participation. And unless you step back far enough to see the pattern, you may live your whole life thinking you were making free choices, when really you were following a script written by someone else. This isn't a conspiracy, it's a structure that doesn't need violence to control you. It just needs your belief in its legitimacy. It rewards obedience with stability. It discourages questions by labeling them disruptive. It doesn't imprison your body. It shapes your thoughts, your values, even your goals. It makes you internalize expectations that serve others. That's how deep the game goes. And here's the hardest part. It flatters you just enough to keep you invested. It tells you you're essential, that your effort matters, that your vote, your labor, your patience is shaping the future. But beneath those comforting words is a quiet truth. The system is designed to function whether you thrive or not. It needs your compliance, not your success. That's why understanding power isn't optional, it's survival. Because power doesn't always show up as force. Often it arrives as routine, as policies you never voted for, as prices you can't control, as rules you follow without knowing who wrote them. And the less you understand how it works, the more likely you are to carry its weight without ever seeing the hands that placed it on your back. Machiavelli's warning wasn't just about rulers, it was about perception. He saw that those who shape the world don't need to be liked or even seen. They only need you to keep believing that playing your part is noble, while they remain hidden behind layers of abstraction, institutions, markets, algorithms. The truth is, you were never the author of this game, but you're not powerless. You're just uninvited from the part of the table where the rules are written. That's not your fault, but it is your responsibility to notice. And when you do, when you see clearly that your decency was never the problem, your ignorance was never a moral failure, and your exhaustion is not a personal flaw, but a symptom of being used, that's when something breaks. Not in you, but in the spell that's been cast over you, and that is the beginning of power. Now that you see it, what do you do with it? After all this clarity, what comes next? Machiavelli wouldn't tell you to complain. He wouldn't encourage moral outrage or empty rebellion. He'd ask you a quieter, sharper question. Are you willing to see the world as it is and act accordingly? You may not be able to change the whole system, but you can stop letting it change you. Strategy isn't always about building empires or becoming rich. Sometimes it's simply about refusing to be fooled. It's knowing when the rules are against you and choosing not to waste your soul trying to win a rigged game. It's no longer measuring your worth by standards that were designed to keep you chasing forever. Start there. Start by defining success on your own terms, not theirs. Not the version that equates value with wealth or status, but the kind that prioritizes inner stability, time, dignity. You don't need to climb higher in a broken game. You need to step back and see it clearly. Learn how narratives are shaped, how money, media, and laws influence what people believe is normal. Not so you can control others, but so you won't be controlled by the illusion. When you stop blindly absorbing the messages pushed at you, you begin to live with intention. You begin to protect your energy, your focus, your peace. Keep your values, but sharpen your filters. Be compassionate, but not naive. Help others, but know when you're being drained. Stay kind, but never forget the difference between loyalty and self-abandonment. This isn't about becoming powerful in the way they define it. It's about becoming sovereign in your own life, quietly, steadily, without applause. Because sometimes the most radical thing you can do in a world built on manipulation is not to conquer it, but to walk away from its games entirely and still stand tall. Machiavelli never told you to stop being good. He just wanted you to stop being used. And now you can be both, awake and grounded, strategic and sincere, clear-eyed, not bitter. That's not just survival, that's freedom.